Welcome to this week's installment of Cleveland Clinic's Transformation Tuesdays live webinar series. I'm Akhil Saklecha, Managing Director of Cleveland Clinic Ventures and your moderator for today's panel. In December, we focused on the world of startups, and our first panel 2 weeks ago addressed how some startups were really trying to tackle COVID-19 head-on and really trying to solve the problems and efficiency around diagnostics. We had a lively discussion covering the challenges that those founders faced, including regulatory hurdles, how they could even get paid, as well as accumulation of data. Today, we're going to look inward, and we're going to look at some of the portfolio companies that Cleveland Clinic has and highlight those. And I thought it might be helpful actually to point out just a few bullet points about what we're achieving in our support of commercialization efforts at a high level for Cleveland Clinic. Since 2000, we've launched over 90 companies, have had over 20 exits, and currently have over 20 active portfolio companies. Our companies have raised over $1 billion in follow-on equity financing as well. In our panel today, we've assembled, I think that the CEOs of 5 select startup companies within our portfolio. And they're all special in their own unique ways. They're all tackling massive healthcare problems and are moving forward in a rapid trajectory. And they're all legitimate moonshot opportunities as well. They're tackling congestive heart failure, Alzheimer's disease, cancer diagnostics, sleep apnea, and surgical navigation. These startups provide a view of innovation through different stages as well. We're going to see developmental through commercialization companies. We're going to see different sectors from medical devices to biotech to software as well. And then through different organ systems, through cardiovascular, neurology, and oncology. And while you hear about a broad swath of technology innovation and approaches, you're also going to see some common themes that you're going to see, such as the background and experience of these individuals who are guiding the companies that we have. You're going to see the location, hint, hint, Midwest, and you're going to see that, how they work with health systems, including Cleveland Clinic. So before we begin, I'm going to remind everyone watching that you can engage with us through the Q&A button that you're going to see on the bottom of your screen. And you can submit questions there. We'll be happy to bring those in and weave them into the conversation. And we're going to go ahead and look at how we can engage with our panelists through that chat function. So I'm going to introduce the 5 members of our panelists now. So first, we've got Tony Giordano, who is CEO of Neurotherapia. We also have Arnon Chait, who is CEO of Cleveland Diagnostics, Phil Rackliffe, CEO of Centerline Biomedical, Steve Goedeke, CEO of Cardionomic, and Josh Nickols, CEO of Enhale Medical. So first, I thought it may make sense to actually go maybe around the table for all 5 of you. And what I'll do, maybe I'll start with you, Tony. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing at Neurotherapia.
Okay, thanks, Akhil. So about myself, I am a serial entrepreneur. I've started 8 different biotech companies in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Louisiana, and now in Cleveland. Neurotherapia, I joined Neurotherapia about 2 years ago. It was started by 2 anesthesiologists at the Cleveland Clinic who had made a novel discovery that a small molecule targeting CB2 receptors in the brain on microglial cells could shift those microglial cells back to a surveillance state. When it did that, it reduced neuroinflammation and had a lot of positive effects in models of Alzheimer's disease and in models of pain. So we were able to spin Neurotherapia out of the Cleveland Clinic, raise some capital, and get 28-day animal tox done in 2 different species. We're in the process of doing 6-month rat tox now. We were able to manufacture our drug product and drug substance for the clinical trials and for the tox studies. We just completed a phase 1A clinical trial in healthy normal individuals where we saw better than expected blood levels of our drug and very minor side effects. And then in addition to that, we've started to look at other indications, including ALS and GBM, where our drug might be effective. And then finally, and importantly, we started to develop 2nd generation molecules so we can protect our platform going forward.
So Tony, I'm curious. You were, you have a lot of opportunity to look at different ways of doing your next thing, right? Based on your success that you had with other early stage commercialization efforts. Well, how did you run across Cleveland Clinic, and what made you come here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the last company I did before, so I had done 4 companies in Philadelphia. And after my 4th company, I wanted to spend some more time with my kids who were getting into high school at that point. And so I left industry and went to LSU and was assistant dean of research and business development, where I helped faculty commercialize their technologies. Then I did 3 other companies. And when my last company licensed our product out as a medical food that went on the market a few years ago, I was looking for other opportunities. I had been in Cleveland at that time, and the clinic had an opening for director, senior director in the innovations group. And I joined the group and started working on special projects, one of which was Neurotherapia. And I had a background in Alzheimer's disease, both at Abbott Labs and 2 of my other companies. And so this was a really intriguing opportunity that the investigators at the clinic were excited about. They got me excited about it. And so with that, we decided to take it forward.
Okay, well, great. Arnon, tell us a little bit about yourself, because it's an interesting background, and also a bit about Cleveland Diagnostics.
So by training, I'm an engineer and a physicist, and I think that most people, if you go around, you'll find that people that start companies usually go through convoluted routes before they get to where they are, and then they continue in more convoluted routes. So I was working at NASA and actually doing a sort of 50% sabbatical at Tufts University when I was reading a book that was written by an interesting Russian physicist or biophysicist that just left Russia at the time. From here and there, we started a company that's still in town that does small molecule drug discovery, actually, services, including for Pfizer even, for almost 20 years. But really what we wanted to do is develop an interesting core technology that still serves us as the core technology for Cleveland Diagnostics, that allows us to look at the business end of all diseases, which is structural changes to proteins. Proteins, after all diseases eventually reside in proteins. And all the technology, typically we look at diseases and approach diseases, especially in diagnostics, depending on the tools that we have. So if we have the tools to look at genes, we simply try to define genes, diseases by genes. That's the whole outcome of next generation sequencing, et cetera, et cetera. But if you really want to get very close to the disease, you have to look at proteins, and you have to actually ask the right question instead of asking how much, which is usually a secondary question in diagnostics. You have to ask, what is the shape of the protein? Because that makes a protein non-functional or functional. So that's all we did. We developed something that is extremely simple, that costs very, very low, so everybody can afford it, fits within the lab, and can tell you if the protein has changed shape. And that's why it could actually be fit into as a technology platform in general. And we chose cancer initially, prostate cancer. As a matter of fact, next week, we're submitting a PMA to the FDA, which is, I think that everybody's basically tearing the last piece of hair that they have already. It looks like the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and I think that every Hindu book that is written on the subject as well, all together on one DVD. But it's going to be in the market. It is in the market right now, and it's going to be hopefully widely in the market. And then we're working on several other diseases, including even COVID. Yep, we're ready for good time.
I'm sorry, Arnon, it might actually help if you, can you elaborate a little bit about how you're thinking of approaching COVID? Because it's interesting in that you're a cancer diagnostic company, but I think it would be neat to just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so in COVID, it seems to us, at least diagnostically, that again, everybody looks at disease on a molecular level. So you either, PCR looks at it as, do you have a piece of the RNA, which is a signature of the virus, unique signature of the virus? or you're looking at a piece of the virus that is already dead and it's here and there, and then you're simply checking to see if you can, attach an antibody to it. But that does not tell you that somebody can infect. And if you look at respiratory diseases, especially, the only question that matters, and it still is outstanding, which is amazing to me, that only about 10 to 20% of the people who really are there, who check positive, for example, for PCR by PCR, can infect you. But because 80% or 90% of those people check positive, you essentially shut down the country. So wouldn't it be lovely if we have a test actually that can say that you can infect, all the rest of you are sick, and you should perhaps get medical care, stay at home, whatever it is, but you cannot infect anymore. So that is the technology that we are still trying to get. In order for us to validate it, we need the BSL-3, which is impossible to do it, but the entire test is right here. And all it is basically, if you can see two colors in here, basically based on their.
Hold it up to the, yeah.
All it is a vial with basically water and polymers and some salts, and you add simply saliva, or basically the same PCR sample that comes in. And if you have live viruses, we convince these two fluids to phase separate in a unique way, such that the virus, specifically the CoV-2, would be only in the bottom phase. So if you then take an aliquot from the bottom and run it on PCR, if you can only find it on the bottom phase, you know that you have live virus. If you find it on the top and the bottom, you know that you just have RNA. And it's that simple, and it can go in front of PCR, for example.
That can really change the game on screening.
Yeah, so it is, but by that time probably there wouldn't be. But unfortunately, this particular epidemic, I think it's only the first in a long line, because so anyway, thanks.
Great. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and Cardionomic, and where you are too, because you're a little bit off. When I say Midwest, you're on the fringe there.
Isn't Minnesota a suburb of Ohio? I think that's what you guys are thinking.
You said it.
That's probably right.
Although, well, anyway, we won't start that tug of war. Steve Goedeke, I'm CEO of Cardionomic. Engineer by training. I spent 9 years at Hewlett Packard back in the glory days, and then I in the instruments division, and then I went off to Medtronic back in the early 90s. I spent 17 years there in a variety of roles, predominantly leadership roles in technology development and product development. And then early in 2010, I was approached by Enhale, which is, for those who don't know, one of the largest venture capital companies in the world. They wanted to do another incubator in the Twin Cities area, and they convinced me to leave Medtronic. I joined the incubator, and we worked on a couple of ideas that were homegrown ideas. And along that way, we also had a couple interactions with the Cleveland Clinic, one of which was catalyzed by sitting on a chairlift in Snowbird, a story that I tell sometimes, which I won't do here in the spirit of time. But because of that chairlift conversation, re-engaged with the Cleveland Clinic and found out about the Cardionomic opportunity, which was an invention by principals at the Cleveland Clinic that allowed for the selective increasing in inotropy in cardiac patients that needed cardiac support without using a systemic pharmacological inotrope. And the systemic pharmacological inotropes have significant downsides for patients. So it's been a little bit of the holy grail to be able to use neuromodulation to improve, selectively improve cardiac function over time. And this group identified an area in the anatomy that had the potential to produce that result. They've done some animal work. We licensed that technology from the incubator. We did one of my guiding principles is identify and lean into the biggest risks first. So we translated that work into humans in the incubator by doing a number of patients in Prague with Vivek Reddy to show that we could identify the location, get the response we wanted without significant downsides such as arrhythmias for the patients. Then with those data in hand, we raised a $20 million round back in 2015 that we have since used, and we've got follow-on funding to get to the point where we are now, where we're about to enter a pilot study in the US and Europe to both demonstrate safety, of course, but some indications of efficacy in a complicated patient population.
I think it's a great narrative of some of the twists and turns on how to get from A to Z to where you are now, just about to imminently launch your pilot, what was there in terms of the unmet need that you're solving? Has it always been clear in terms of what you're doing and what you're going after there?
No, I think it's been a raging debate, actually. That's a debate that lives on with even the discoverers of the modality and us as a company. There's an argument, it's a legitimate argument, that you could go after post-surgical patients and meet that need. The patient's anatomy is already open. You have more tolerance for invasiveness potentially than the population we're going after. But we've done extensive market research and looked at the patient care pathway and all of those, I think, disciplines that you get from a large company about where to start first. And we, including my investors, have made the decision that we're going to go after acute decompensated heart failure patients first. These are patients who enter the ED, they get a cardiology consult, so the patient is known, they're already in the care pathway, they're with the right caregiver. A decision can be made to take them off to the cath lab to get our product placed. And then we provide the benefits of essentially a less acute electronic VAD, kind of a VAD light without a pump, for patients that need that enhanced perfusion.
Got it. Well, good. Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself and Enhale.
Yeah, thank you, Akhil. Thanks for the invitation to talk today. Josh Nickols, I'm CEO of Enhale Medical. I have about 20 years of experience working in the life sciences industry, having started out, like many of the folks on the panel today, academic. I've got a PhD in molecular neuroscience out of Vanderbilt. Sold my last company in 2017. I've worked across medical devices, diagnostics, therapeutics. In 2017, actually joined Cincitech, which is a Cincinnati-based investor group, venture investor, where I worked for about 2 years and had the opportunity to get to know many of the folks at Cleveland Clinic, including Dr. Frank Pape, who runs the Plastic Surgery Institute there. In that time, became really intrigued by the technology that he had developed. He's an innovator and an inventor, and he has invented the core technology behind Enhale. And so for the last 2 years, starting in 2018, we've been working together in partnership with the Cleveland Clinic and begun making some hires in the development of our technology for hypoglossal nerve stimulation treatment of obstructive sleep apnea.
To me, sleep apnea is kind of one of these, one of the biggest and kind of hidden markets that we have out there. A lot of people don't really realize the prominence of what sleep apnea can do in terms of complications, comorbidities that can be associated with that. And so, when I look at that and I see the opportunity and I see how CPAP, has such a poor compliance because of what it is, and then I see that a company like Inspire, which went public just a couple of years ago, has a market cap now of $5 billion, and really hasn't done a huge number of procedures or revenue to get that. It makes the opportunity really exciting, but it obviously attracts a lot of entrepreneurs and startups to that space. How do you look at what you're trying to do, with the competition that's out there?
Yeah, so I think that what you're seeing is investors and people in the field, practitioners, are recognizing the potential that exists for hypoglossal nerve stimulation relative to more traditional therapies like CPAP, where patients who may become non-adherent to using their CPAPs and are poorly treated by them, having a new option whereby an implant can offer similar or superior outcomes, both in terms of duration and reduction in their sleep apnea, can be really significant. The way that we're looking at the market opportunity is based, again, coming off of Dr. Pape's technology and innovation, where we can reduce the invasiveness, both on the surgical side and the intrusiveness, if you will, into the patient's life, living with a therapy for sleep apnea. We've taken a number of the core principles and technology that he developed and embedded those into our product, and are really excited about the potential it brings to patients.
Josh, just speaking of this, there's a question from someone in the audience. what do you think of the oral appliances, right? The dental devices as part of that competitive landscape, or what's out there available?
It's a good question. They can be effective for patients who have lesser severity sleep apnea. Some patients can be treated quite well with oral appliances, just like many patients will do quite well with CPAP. Really, the market that we look at and Inspire looks at is one composed of where those patients have progressed over time and become much more severe, and really don't respond well to those therapies, nor perhaps to some surgeries.
Got it. Phil, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're trying to achieve with Centerline.
Great. Thanks, Akhil, for the opportunity. So I'm Phil Rackliffe, the CEO of Centerline Biomedical. I've been here about a year and a half, but my history takes me about 25 years in healthcare, broadly speaking, both on the med tech and pharmaceutical sides. Long stints of my career were at Baxter and Boston Scientific, and then really wanted to do something more entrepreneurial and smaller companies that were more nimble and moved at a faster pace. So went to private equity, and then private equity went out to a startup in Richmond, Virginia, and then moved to Centerline again about 18 months ago. So been really wowed and compelled by the technology. So what we do at Centerline is we provide the analogy or analogous to what you used to use for maps, but we do that for surgical navigation. In the past, you used to use two-dimensional maps to get from point A to point B, but now we wouldn't get anywhere without using our phones or Waze or Google Maps. Unfortunately, for endovascular surgery, they are still using, and clinicians are still using, the equivalent to what 2D maps are, and that's two-dimensional grayscale fluoroscopy, which can be challenging to not only to the provider, but to the patient or those in the room, because it emits harmful radiation. You have to use contrast dye with it, and procedures are quite long, and it's tough to understand where you're at. So what we provided is three-dimensional surgical navigation for endovascular repairs. We were developed at the Cleveland Clinic. I'm looking out my window at it right now. We're on the grounds here, and we're developed really by a key luminary vascular surgeon named Roy Greenberg, who unfortunately passed a couple of years past of cancer that we can't help to think may have been caused by the radiation exposure that was emitting. So we are at a commercial stage right now. We're 510(k) cleared in the descending aorta for EVAR and AAA. We've got 4 other development programs in structural heart and neurovascular and peripheral vascular applications. And we are launching right now. Just did a very successful case yesterday at the Cleveland Clinic, a first patient in a new study that we have called Motion. So thank you.
Phil, maybe make a comment about what you're trying to achieve with that study.
Yeah, so that study is really a safety and performance study, really to help go along with our MDR submission for CE approval. The medical device requirement has gotten more stringent in order to get European clearance for medical technologies and med devices. So this study will go along with our submission for international launch next year.
Got it. So I think, when I listen, I know all of you, right, really well, but when I listen to your backgrounds again, it's still, really impressive, right, in terms of who you are and why you've chosen to do startups and the specific ones that you've chosen. But I do want to turn the topic, I think, to kind of something more timely in COVID. And I think a lot of startups have had to adapt to COVID in different ways. And I know all of you have just through conversation. But has there been, I guess, some examples of things that you had to do that you really weren't prepared to do or hadn't really thought about, or changes that you needed to make? Can you guys share any examples of some of that? I'll just throw it out to all of you for that.
Maybe I'll start real quick because I ended the last one. I think that our ability to want to really get commercial adoption and exposure in a short amount of time and launching right about when COVID hit meant the face-to-face interaction to show and describe our technology to vascular surgeons and to hospital systems was not going to happen. So really what we did is worked, the team did a great job and was very resilient to come up very quickly with virtual demos that were quite effective in order to create demand. And really right through COVID, we were averaging, 1 to 2 a day. And ironically, the access to physicians was higher because they weren't doing these complex vascular surgeries because of COVID was shutting it down. So we had great access and really got this virtual demo up and running.
Yeah, perhaps just to add to that, I mean, I think I'm quite sure that in the future there would be literally thousands of PhDs, thesis, and Harvard Business Schools books that would be written on case studies on this pandemic and what it proved to us as a nation, and about the technology and the fundamentals of this infrastructure that we have here, which is, I think it's quite amazing. We sort of took it for granted, and it really proved that it does work. In ways that at least I couldn't foresee it, because we all just complain about how stodgy and how slow and how this and about head. So I can tell you, it's kind of that's the first time that you're asking this, Akhil, that I'm kind of thinking back, well, small company, what did we prove? So on March, we actually got our license for high complexity CLIA lab, which means that we can actually accept cancer samples, cancer patients' blood samples, and process them and reports the results and everything else. Yes, it took maybe 3 months before we got our first patients in since then, because simply nobody was doing, everything was shut down during the first part of the pandemic. But after that, things are working out fairly well. What can I say? We finished up a whole PMA and it's sending out. We raised a nice round of, I don't know, $17 million with people that, last time I saw them were, I don't know, the JP Morgan, I guess, in January. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know what's happened. It's just like the system works. It's not ideal because we're all around Zoom, but it's actually, the question is what, it makes me question almost, do we need to see each other? I mean, this morning I have my weekly management meeting. We always strictly put it at an hour and a half. If you cannot do it in an hour and a half, then you're just talking about football, which we had a good game last night. But that's it. It's kind of it's really make me think twice about almost everything that we do. Is it necessary or is it not? It works.
Yeah, I think we saw an impact in our ability to do OUS studies, which did delay our accumulation of human data by a modest amount. We had some supply chain impacts, but I think what Arnon was saying was, I think overall the journey and the legacy is going to be a big positive. Our clinician interaction, our coordinator interaction is going much smoother. I think, it's a big deal for us to fly somewhere for a 1-hour meeting. It's disruptive for the clinic when people like us show up. You got to check us in at the front door. We got to walk through the building. Doctors are unavailable, et cetera, et cetera. People are much more willing to do meetings at a convenient time. They'll do a meeting at 4:30 or 5 or 5:30 in the evening because they know it's going to get in. They know they're not going to get dragged out to dinner. I think that the net positive is very high. We clearly see some inefficiencies with not being face-to-face. You do lose some personal touch. I think there's an erosion of the communication across the network of the community. What's going on at various companies when you bump into people in the hallway at big meetings, and you learn about kind of the state of the ocean, if you will. I think that we are losing. But on the positives right now offset the negatives. And I think when we can get back just enough personal communication over time, we're going to find ourselves in a much better spot than we were beforehand, all in all. Personally, I'm quite optimistic.
We got really lucky with COVID. We had our phase 1 trial was underway. We had our last patient enrolled and the site shut down right after the enrollment. So it was perfect. The patient had completed. We did lose about 3 months, but one of the things to get to close out the site and have the CRO go back, but that wasn't devastating. One of the things that I have saw that I think is going to be good going forward too is that for our next trial, we've been getting proposals from CROs, and all the CROs have COVID contingency plans now. And so they have plans that, how do we get to the patients if the site shuts down, and how do we keep monitoring the patients, and how do we keep the trial going? And I think that's good because they're starting to put into plans that are going to allow us to run the trials more efficiently, even after we get through this pandemic.
Akhil, I'd agree with all that. And as you remember, back when we were about to kick off 2 clinical studies that we're using to help design our product and refine our product, COVID really shut things down, and those studies got delayed. That was hard, but I think what it allowed us to do was spend more time with other contractors and other companies, really thinking hard about our technology and getting a lot more of their time and input, simply because everybody was very eager to return to some semblance of normal. And so while we lost a little bit of time on one end of it, the opportunity to work more closely with engineering firms has been really great.
Yeah. I'd like to riff off Josh's point for one moment, if I can, which is, I think everybody on this panel has a burn rate. I know mine is $25,000 a day, as my team is frequently reminded. So we make decisions in the context of those kinds of numbers and the finite amount of capital that we have. And what I heard Josh, and what I heard you say was, you didn't stand still during that time. You knew that you were going to burn money. You got done what you could get done, and some good things happened out of it. And I think that's a uniquely startup behavior, which is, boy, the sand is still running through the hourglass, and they're little dollars, by the way, not sand. And you just got to get as much done as you can before the dollars are gone out of the top of the hourglass.
Yeah, I would echo that exactly. It's part of what's good about being in a startup is you can be nimble and do those type of things versus the legacy of being in a bigger company. But a couple of you touched on I think something interesting, maybe around funding. I know that Arnon, you're days away from closing that round that you mentioned, and Josh, you are also probably a week optimistically away from closing a large round, and and they both directly impact what Steve was talking about this the burn rate that's going on and how to navigate around COVID issues. But you both managed to do something that is pretty unique and I imagine tough in this environment. It's something you definitely have to react to. But what was it like to raise those large rounds? And actually, it'll play into how I know Tony is about to launch fundraising and Phil is. So maybe words of advice to them and what you encountered in this year that you're going after this money.
So I guess I'll start. Initially when the quarantine came and things slowed down significantly, I think venture funds looked at their portfolio for probably 6 to 8 weeks and said, what do we need here to keep everybody going? And so that really did cause a pause in our communication and our working with venture funds. That said, however, it was a rapid return to looking at deal opportunities for those venture funds. And I'd say that now is as strong as it was just shortly after. Everybody working on the venture side has been very interested in moving through opportunities, looking at deals, and then ultimately arriving at investments. And so, we're really excited about the syndicate that we put together. We have an amazing partnership. I think that we're well positioned to use the capital that we're raising now for the next phase of our development.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that money has been cheap for so long since then, when the cost of money became zero or nearly zero. First of all, that's the second point was that flashlight has been shined on us for so long that people actually realize that we're actually doing something useful, because I mean, we do things that nobody understands exactly. You see eventually people sticking in things into you, but you don't know what they do. And it's kind of how to connect that eventually to the Wall Street of the world and all that. Bottom line is it was hard to actually get to valuations that are normal valuation, but now you can see that actually my problem is almost, and Akhil always remind me, you're not them. And I agree with you, Akhil, always. In our space, for example, it's hard to, if I were the coach today, it was how to not use stupid money, which is people at basically that have offerings equivalent to ours, raise $250 million at a round. Because they play different games than us. So the money is there, and the question is not really how to raise it anymore. It's how not to raise stupid money and be tied up then to things that really makes no sense. And being really right here in the Midwest is one advantage almost, because my goal in life is eventually to end up really doing something useful that makes sense and is a product that lasts through the bubble that is clearly is out there now. When Airbnb is that, I don't know what it is anymore, one can see that this is not going to last.
Yeah. There's a question from the audience that's somewhat tangential to this. So it's, and I'll open up to the group, is based on your experiences and understanding of how the pandemic is affecting the way we approach care, do you see an increased investment into new medical device innovations and startups focusing on telehealth principles and providing care more easily from a distance?
I'd say that's certainly a theme in the thesis looking forward for investors, that there has to be the ability to treat patients at a distance and not necessarily to bring them into the clinic. That's something that we have embedded into both our technology and the way that we talk with investors. I don't know that, I'm sure that there are investors who are looking for therapeutics or diagnostics exactly for COVID, but I think that there's a theme that is being carried through the lens that investors are using and looking at opportunities as they see a shift in the way that patients are treated.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we'll see this. I mean, we have to see it, right? I think the world, to Arnon's point earlier, the way we do business, the way that healthcare is going to evolve, it has to evolve based on this. And I think people are going to be more comfortable. I know, colleagues in the venture capital industry, they're making investments without even visiting the company they're at, without, even meeting the founders. And right now, if they're taking baby steps, they may have, they may know the founder, they may be, introduced to them through a trusted source, but we've seen that, right? I think Josh and Arnon, you've seen that, firsthand. I'm curious though, has location played a role? Do you think it has hindered you, helped you, and maybe in all aspects, not just fundraising, but in hiring? I mean, other things. How do all of you look at that? Is that, because I know that in the past, not being on the coast was always felt or perceived to be a problem, but how do all of you look at that?
Maybe I think it's actually it's sorry, Steve. I think it's actually kind of went full circle, and what I mean by that is recently, we're getting the amount of inbound kind of, whether it's people applying for jobs on our website, of resumes coming in from people on the coast that want to come to a lower cost location like a Cleveland that are very high, very talented, has never been higher, to the point of multiple people per day for whether it's software roles that you would never have thought 6 to 9 months ago would come to Cleveland for a role and move out of New York or the Valley. So it's actually worked very well recently on that. And obviously just the being born out of the Cleveland Clinic and being on the grounds here is a huge draw. So I think both the cost of living aspect, and then there is just this exodus of some of the major cities on both the coasts that want to get to a different way of life.
I was going to joke that this is maybe where Ohio is a suburb of Minnesota, because we mathematically we're the third largest area for investment in med tech after Silicon Valley, Boston, that's then Minneapolis area, and we have a huge ecosystem here. It's an enormous. The big three are here with headquarters. We've got a vast number of vendors, massive number of people that have been trained in the large companies and have worked in the small companies, CROs, you name it. And so I think we just got a very, very rich ecosystem here that has made it very easy to get essentially everything we need done locally. We've had an option here for everything we've needed: manufacturing, simulator design, catheter build, you name it. So it's geography does matter. It matters a lot. That said,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. No, I wanted to say the double whammy of this pandemic also proved to everybody. I mean, you're paying these huge rents or housing prices out on the coast, and eventually you're not even sitting there. I mean, you're just sitting there and then working remotely, and because you're not on the 101 or 93 or whatever it is, it's kind of at the end of the day, you're just doing the calculus and seem to say, what am I doing in these two places? I mean, I can do the same thing at the place that is so much less expensive. We don't find any issue. On the other hand, if anybody knows, if anybody is listening, we'll have a job opening as a VP for R&D very soon. So yes.
I like that.
A little ad, Akhil. So when I get recruited for other CEO jobs, there's been a real shift lately from, hey, will you move to California or Boston? And some, of course, from the Twin Cities area, but the last 3 that have come over the transom have all been jobs that said you can put the company anywhere you want, including Minneapolis. So I think to Arnon's point, the venture world is seeing much more flexibility. Of course, the cost of doing business in Minnesota is much less than it is on the coast. It is a major sea change.
Yeah.
It almost, you know, there was another question I was thinking of, which was even tangential off of that around recruiting, but it sounds like that's not really an issue. I mean, I know in the past it had been, but it sounds like maybe it's even easier because of this pandemic now to recruit and get people to come to where you are. Or maybe it doesn't matter anymore, right? Location may not matter anymore where they are. Is that what all of you are thinking or seeing?
I think there's a part of, there need to be flexible during this time, and a lot of people don't want to move, and there's a bleed-in period to people taking jobs that do require physical location, let's say in Cleveland. I mean, we're very much still have a strong emphasis on R&D and advancing our clinical platforms and pipeline. And that is better in a kind of a face-to-face environment. But we just need to be flexible with that. But I do think, you know, at least in Cleveland in particular, just whether it's people from the Cleveland Clinic or from Case and the major universities or even Pittsburgh, they're all close, and there's great universities there, of which when you get into the right network, you can tap into a lot of excellent people.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to ask this next question with a little bit of trepidation. So, but let's be honest as we can. But I know it's certainly something that entrepreneurs, when they talk with us, always have a question about. But what is it like? And I'm you know, I know we're going to be talking about the Cleveland Clinic, but I'm going to talk about it broadly, just because I know you've talked about or talked with other health systems as well, just in interactions. But what's it like, you know, working with a health system this size, you know, taking money from investors that are at health systems? And I know, Steve, you've got a unique situation given money that you've taken in, but it'd be great to kind of understand the pros and cons of how you guys look at that, right?
You want to skip to the next question?
Arnon, go ahead. Just understand.
I'll let everybody else say first. I'll be the last. I'll be the closer here. You know, I'll judge the currents.
Akhil, I tried to find a political, maybe politically correct is the right way, a nice way to say this. There's enormous strength being associated with the Cleveland Clinic. There's enormous complexity being associated with the Cleveland Clinic.
Mm-hmm. What a diplomat!
I mean, the only thing I would say is you know, the ability to tap into great physicians, or, you know, I have the benefit, or we have the benefit of being right across the street. So we need to get to the animal lab to do work on TAVR for aortic valves. We can go across the street and do that. We need access to a doctor to knock ideas off of. We've got good access to do that. So I think there are some incredible talents within the organization, of which, when utilized and asked, I find more often a yes than a no. So that's been great. I mean, other things are just plainly, you know, whether it's Cleveland Clinic or any other system, it's more, you know, there's bureaucracy and it's a slow to act sometimes, but that comes with any major company, frankly. But I think overall the pros weigh much more heavily than the cons.
Yeah, I would agree with Phil in that for us, we, you know, needed a lot of help in understanding the diseases that we're going after, ALS and AD. And we walked across the street and talked to some of the world experts in those areas. We needed assistance in developing our second generation molecule, and the Cleveland Clinic has now set up their drug discovery program. So we got access to a phenomenal medicinal chemist who had been at Vanderbilt and at Merck, and we're working with him. We need help in radio labeling our molecule so that we could do biodistribution studies. And again, we walked across the street to the Cleveland Clinic and met with a radiosynthesis expert and got help with that. So we've had terrific experiences working with the clinic. The bureaucracy is tough, and it was really tough for me because I had come from a small company backgrounds. After I left Abbott, I'd been in a lot of small companies where we did things very quickly. And as was said earlier, time is money. So we didn't waste a lot of time. And to sit at the clinic then, and some of my first experiences getting a CDA signed that, you know, with a small company would take a day or two, suddenly takes weeks at the clinic to get something signed. So, but when you realize that the clinic's primary mission is to treat patients, and that, you know, what we're doing is important, you start to understand that it will take a little bit more time to get these things done, but at the end of the day, they will get done. You just have to be a little more patient than we like to be in a small company.
So perhaps maybe I'll close on this. I don't know, Josh, you want to say? Or maybe you'll be the closer.
I'd agree with all that's been said here. You know, oftentimes you feel like you have to get in line with a big institution. That's kind of obvious. But I think, again, just echoing what else had been said, the access to thought leadership is really, you know, incredibly important to our company. From the docs who are in sleep medicine, sleep surgery, you know, having access to surgeons that we can, you know, work through ideas with, that has been absolutely invaluable being a part of the clinic. Yeah,
so to close it, just to say, I mean, I'll say a big ditto to just about everything that was said so far, because I would just say unequivocally that without the Cleveland Clinic, we wouldn't be today where we are. There's no question about it. I tried to do it without the Cleveland Clinic before, and I couldn't, so I can say that. And as far as bureaucracy, yes, the Cleveland Clinic has to figure out how to make sure that legal works for the customer and not for legal. How does budgets works for looking at budget doesn't take more than a day because it shouldn't, et cetera, et cetera. That's, for me at least, there is such a huge disconnect because what the clinical side can do and does, and what the bureaucracy leaves for the sake of bureaucracy to some extent. And we all love the clinic, and then but that's a disconnect is something that should be closed. And it's not unique to the clinic. I'm not saying anything unique to the clinic. I'm sure we're working with Johns Hopkins. We'll start working with Mayo, all the large clinical organizations that are driven and are led by physicians, fundamentally work like that. But the final thing is also, the other thing is, again, right above your head there on that, there is Cleveland Clinic. Without that brand name, you know, I don't think, again, this is, you start and end with the brand name. Not only with what you get, but you just say these words and you immediately being recognized and treated completely differently. And I couldn't get it anywhere. So yes, I'll even take legal with all the rest.
Although I will say, Akhil, on 90 minutes today is a record. Well, a press release coming out this afternoon, and we got it through the clinic in 90 minutes. So
communication is different. Communication is different.
Communication. I've never. That was great.
Yeah,
also
that's great. So I mean, I think if you can work with the clinic, you probably can work anywhere, work through the processes. But I appreciate that very honest dialogue. There's actually a couple of questions that came from the audience. So I'll throw this out. It's been said that the COVID pandemic has, has accelerated medtech several years to adapt to conditions such as telehealth, emergency device authorization. Do you foresee these effects be permanent, or will we reverse or slow down again after the pandemic? How do you guys look at that?
Actually, we communicated with some members of Congress directly, because this is we looked at it as an opportune time that cannot be missed. Like any disaster could not be missed, to actually, it's proved exactly the point that namely the EUA process did not produce anything that was undesired. So why couldn't the FDA actually adopt it going forward? Why should we have all the rest? Why should I take such a long time to get a process that could be done truly in 1 month? I mean, I'm answering questions that are totally irrelevant and takes me 6 months or so just to get to the answer. So we actually propose, and the same thing should go to reimbursement. We're all in medical device, roughly medical device diagnostics, and you all know exactly what I'm talking about. The reimbursement system here is not a disaster even. It's the most irrational, draconian stupidity that anybody could have invented if given all the ingredients on the table. I cannot, so without getting to the details about this, how it works or how it doesn't work, why couldn't we take the opportunity to simply figure out how to do that? Why wouldn't it be equivalent to drugs? Namely, once you get FDA, you automatically get reimbursed. It's kind of, there are so many things, and we're discussing it directly with the right people today. Finally, we got to the right people in Congress, and potentially we'll put our 5 cents. Whether it's going to make sense, who knows? But yes, we shouldn't lose that opportune time.
Yeah, the way I look at it is we've opened the maybe, I don't want to say Pandora's box because that's not the right word. We've opened the doors and the floodgates to really look at how areas such as telehealth can be used in a variety of areas. We've seen the reimbursement for that work. Now the question is, will insurance companies continue that? I think to some degree. I think we'll see providers really adopt telehealth to sustainable fashion. I think the emergency, the EUA, emergency use authorization, I think we'll see that in certain circumstances being used. So I think we're going to see the longer term sustained effects, the smart effects of the pandemic last longer. Now there's another question, and this gets back to the recruiting comment that we had earlier. Have you found it easier to source tech talent in Columbus or Cleveland? Where is the tech talent hub in Ohio? How do you look at that? I know, Phil, you talked about this earlier, but maybe Josh and Arnon, you can comment on this as well.
Steve, you should answer.
Minneapolis.
We've looked both in Cleveland and Cincinnati and found really great resources there for talent. Have not looked in Columbus, but we've really been impressed by the people who've been available. Both are rich areas for med tech, software development. A lot of different resources can be found there. Just haven't really looked yet in Columbus.
Yeah. So, I'll throw out another question that I was kind of thinking about over the weekend was, view on strategics, right? Because I think, for a number of you, strategics are important. Understanding when to work with them, how to work with them. Is pairing with them too early the right thing, or do you want to wait and optimize that timing based on value? How do you guys, I mean, there's so many, it's so complex, right? There's pros and cons about it. How do you look at that? The relationship with strategics, taking money from them, partnering with them, the timing of that. How do all of you look at that? Because it's a really important area for all of your companies.
So maybe I'll just say that I think getting some type of a strategic agreement with a major strategic is a vote of confidence on the technology if it's a real agreement where you're going to do work. So I think there is benefit there in having an agreement with the strategic. When it gets into funding, frankly, I think, every technology is going to be different, Akhil, and whether or not it's important or not. I would say that for our technology, having them in a round is a good thing as long as it doesn't come with conditions of which are going to hurt an exit. And I think so having them in is another vote of confidence as long as it doesn't hurt your long-term exitability, whatever that may be.
I think working with strategics for a small company is a great opportunity. I know the first company I started in Philadelphia, we had we were a platform technology company. We had partnerships with 3 different strategics when we were getting going. And that really helped us grow out the company, hire people, and push it forward in a much better fashion. I think even with Neurotherapia, we view ourselves as a platform company looking at neuroinflammation and microglial. And the fact that we can target a number of different disease states, my goal is to identify strategic partners early and get involved with them around each of the different potential opportunities, because they have a great deal of experience also, that they're not only will they bring money to the table, but their experience in that therapeutic area will be invaluable to us.
I agree with that. You know, as you're suggesting, Akhil, there is the potential for greater complexity by having a strategic investor. I think that's something everybody just needs to be cognizant of as you start those conversations. That said, however, what's obvious that does come with it is sort of that street level or clinic level understanding of the need and the opportunity, and having that voice is going to be really valuable to a company.
Yeah. So we're going to be running out of time soon, and I have so many more questions, but there's another question from the audience. I'm gonna weave that, and I want to ask a final question if we have time. But so as medtech startup founders, what is your toughest challenge? Is it finding the right people, the development process, navigating regulations? How do all of you view that? Maybe we can go quickly around the table around that. Steve?
That was a dollar sign for those of you who couldn't see it. Yeah, I mean, look, raising capital is incredibly difficult, and it's a complicated process. Yeah, every venture fund has a thesis that changes over time. You have champions that change over time. You have the life cycle of the various funds that limit their ability to do early stage investments later in the life cycle of the funds. And you can take this matrix of all of those dynamics against the universe of venture capital sources, and it's a massive shifting sea that we as CEOs have to navigate to find the right partner at the right time to do the right deal. It's an enormous effort, and you have to have the right. I mean, all the things that the venture folks do in a diligence around care pathway, reimbursement, technology risk, availability of talent, et cetera, et cetera. All those things have to be addressed at times when maybe you're not ready to address them early in the cycle of a project. It's very, that for me, that's by far and away the hardest part.
I would agree. Funding is very, very difficult, but I think regulatory is something else that for a therapeutic company is one thing that we really can't control. And I can speak again to one of my earlier companies. We were in the cardio-renal division with one of our products, and we were getting a green light to sail through. But because of patent issues, we had to move over to analgesics and anesthesiology. And they stopped us, and they wanted us to go back and do a whole lot more work that we couldn't afford to do. So there was no predicting. I mean, in one division of the FDA, you had a very clear and straightforward path, and you just switch divisions, and suddenly they throw up different roadblocks. And that's something, until you write the IND, you can't control, and you don't know what's going to come out of it.
Yeah. So guys, we're literally almost up against the clock, and I do want to ask this last question. I know we have 2 more questions from the audience, but I don't think we're going to get to that those questions. But I want to limit all of you to just maybe 1 or 2 sentences on this. But I think just based on the audience mix, give us this around advice. So what one piece of advice would you give our audience about running a startup, right? So let's limit the responses, but I'm going to start with Josh.
I think early on with the startup, there are really hard problems, and not getting discouraged. Those hard problems are the opportunities where you have to make huge leaps, both in intellectual property, the way that you define your products. So I just say, keep going, perseverance, and not getting discouraged.
Great. Arnon.
Yep, the last word that Josh said, perseverance is 95% after you have the 5% that makes you there. Without the 5, you're not there, but after that, it's just 95% perseverance. You never hear no. It doesn't matter that they tell you all the time no, you just do it, because eventually you will get there. And then the last, you think of yourself as a utility infielder or whatever. You just do all the time, all the work that needs to be done, and clean windows.
Phil.
Time management 101. So looking at what you're not going to do and focusing on the one or two most important things that you've got to do. And to Arnon's point, you are into the weeds one day and the next thing you're talking about a 5-year strat plan. So get ready for it.
Steve.
I would say identify what your key risks are very honestly and face them as your top priority. It'll make fundraising easier. You'll burn off the things that really matter. You're going to discover the things that are worse than you thought, and some things aren't as bad as you thought. But when I coach other CEOs, new CEOs to the startup game, I find that many of them don't want to face the big risks first for fear of getting bad news. And I think that's exactly backwards. Face the hard stuff first.
Tony.
To me, it's all about the team. One, hire people smarter than you. And two, when you're going out and getting money, interview your investors, because you want investors who you want to be on the phone with and who you want to be able to talk to, and not investors who you dread when you see their number come across. So I think it's all about the team.
That's good, guys.
No comment. I know Arnon's tried to block my call a few times, but I think all of those words of advice were great. I mean, I think we can all learn from them. So we're out of time, but I wanted to thank all of you for your participation today. The audience, we had great participation and questions. The conversation was really stimulating. I want to thank everyone who's listening for joining us this year on the Transformation Tuesdays. It was a new programming function that we started this year, and we can't wait to introduce our lineup for 2021. And I think while this year was challenging, we're really excited about the community we've created, the platform that we have, and how we're going to launch next year's programming. So we're going to kick off the first quarter next year discussing the global impact of healthcare. Obviously, the pandemic is still there, but also highlight a lot of the healthcare disparities that we're seeing that are becoming more highlighted given what we're experiencing. And we've got really a good all-star lineup of speakers and panelists and key opinion leaders. So mark your calendar. That date is January 12th at 1 o'clock. And so finally, from our Cleveland Clinic family to yours, we wish you a safe and healthy holiday season. So thank you all for your participation, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
Sure.